how's everybody doing? Let's just pop over here. And Matt Walsh reviews a woke children's book, C is for Consent. You know what? I want to watch this one. And that tells you a lot about the content of Matt Walsh. That I literally it's the latest video. It's been 5 hours old, and already I'm like half hard thinking about laughing at this. Matt Walsh, if you're watching, which you're not because no one knows who the fuck I am on the internet, this isn't personal. It's just that everything about you is garbage, and I find you laughable.
Okay, so now we're going to look at another woke children's book. This one, on the surface, I mean, literally reading the book by its cover, it seems maybe not as bad as some of the others that we've looked at, that we've reviewed.
Ooh, he's setting it up. Oh, maybe it's not as bad. ...
But you never know. So we just got to, we're going to read this whole thing. It's pretty short, and I'll read the whole thing, and then I'll offer my review. So let's get into it. This is called C is for Consent. And this is, it says ages, this is for ages 0 and plus. So if you have a 0-year-old child, they could read this and up from there. I mean, you know, it's a board book, it's short. So this is really for kids, probably, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. All right. It says, it's time for a party with family and friends.
This book will give Matt Walsh the bends. Ooh,
and you see, of course, there we've got the interracial gay couple. We've got the interracial disabled couple. Well, one member of the couple's disabled. You got to get all the representation there. And
I do sort of agree in one very, very simple way, and that is that we are a little bit heavy-handed when we try and make material for kids that is diverse and inclusive, which is, I think, 100% awesome. But I feel like we really tend to go over the top with, especially like background characters and stuff. Like there's to me, if you're telling the story of like a child, this book, for example, did we need to have like every single possible group on the first page? Probably not. I would call that not a worthwhile argument, but, I'd rather see it than not have any of it. But I feel like it's the pendulum effect where now we're sort of over hitting the mark, which gives guys like Matt Walsh reason to go, oh, every single stereotypical progressive. My whole body rejects his existence, like having a sympathetic retro-abortion on behalf of his birther. I feel that pain. When he dies, we should do a pink mass where the Satanic Temple does this, where they will have lesbians have sex on the grave as part of the pink mass, have sex on the grave of the person, which turns them gay in the afterlife. So, Matt Walsh, enjoy being straight while you can. Remember when Matt was scaring us about pedos? Well, don't try to teach children about consent to protect them, because that is also bad. Yes, because consent is a terrible thing that children need to exercise when they're surrounded by the danger sex monsters.
I don't see any furries. I don't see anyone who's apparently transsexual or even transgender or pansexual, so that's a problem, but we'll keep going. Grandma wants a hug, but...
Oh, Matt, don't you know that you may be seeing them and they may be transgender or they may be pansexual, but sometimes you can't even see those things because some trans people either look like the gender that they identify as or are not currently presenting as the gender that they identify as. So trust me, they're there. And pan, it's really hard to see in someone's eyes. I guess if you look really close, you can see the Matt Walsh scaredy cat freak out, big eyes, like I want to fuck everything that he obviously associates with being pan. Grandma wants a hug, but Finn isn't in the mood. Okay.
But Finn isn't in the mood. That's okay, says Dad. You don't have to give hugs if you don't want to.
I legit want to hear him be like, no, you do have to give hugs. When it becomes a corporate value, it just comes off as tokenism, which makes it easy to critique from the left, but also easy for reactionaries to attack it. Yeah, exactly.
Grandpa leans down to kiss Finn. Mom says, please ask for consent first.
God, Mom, you
Grandpa
whore.
asks, may I kiss you on the cheek? Finn replies, yes, you may. Auntie and Uncle want Finn to sit with them. Come sit on my lap. No, you have to sit on my lap. Finn says, no, thank you. My parents say I don't have to sit on anyone's lap if I don't feel like it. What a brat this kid is.
Are you serious? You're complaining? Like, you're certain that that guy in the wheelchair is like an active gay predator pedophile. And you're also like, what a brat. Why should he not be forced to sit on the lap of a person who I clearly hate and want to, see eradicated from the world? Do your job, child. Your consent matters nothing.
Mom's friends give Finn a present. Does that mean he has to hug or kiss that person? Only if he wants to. Maybe Finn could high five or fist bump instead. Or maybe he doesn't want to be touched at all. It's his choice what happens to his body.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Finn is happy to see his best friend, Rue. He asks, may I hold your hand? It is okay for you to say no. Rue replies, yes, you may hold my hand. Thank you for asking first. And that's it. That's the end of the whole story. Okay. Then there are
So I'm just gonna go on a limb here and say that my assumption here is that Matt will have read this book and thought, oh, there's really nothing to it. This is a perfectly reasonable treatise explaining consent to children, that children are not required to sit on laps or hug or kiss or whatever. They have bodily autonomy, and that this is a good book, and I'm sure Matt will give us his thumbs up. Let's find out.
discussion questions at the end, which we won't get into. Well, so that actually is somewhat surprisingly, this is the worst one yet, I think. This somehow manages to be more disturbing than, books that are pushing transgenderism. And
More disturbing than books that are pushing transgenderism. Okay. So, accepting that a child has the ability to... Yeah, the discussion questions clearly don't fit his narrative. Has the ability to decide whether or not someone gets to touch them. Something which I guarantee you he is 100% on board. You know what? Let's just quickly look for Matt Walsh, Joe Biden sniff. Let's just see. I'm not on Twitter, so... in his speech, Joe Biden promised to restore our souls. How does the president restore our souls? Is that something that can be handled by executive order? Maybe he didn't... I don't know how Twitter works. I feel like he's made lots of comments about the sniffing. Maybe I'm wrong, but when Joe Biden leans down and touches a child, I feel like Matt Walsh isn't going, that child deserves it. That child just needs to suck it up and accept the fact that a grown adult has more autonomy over their body. That's pretty sure that he will save our children from Biden, just not from, others.
bisexuality and all that kind of stuff. Those books are bad too, but don't get me wrong, but this one disturbs me on a deeper level. So let's count the ways. To begin.
Okay. Just saying, this feels a lot like a self-report on Matt Walsh being a child raping freak, but let's give him a chance.
Before we get to the major problems here, this kid is awful. I mean, this is what happens when you have permissive hippie parents. I can't imagine if I was a little kid, if I was like 6 years old, and my grandmother came to visit and said, hey, give me a hug. And I said, nah, I don't feel like it, Granny.
Like, legit? You can't imagine a world where a child doesn't want to have a kiss from Granny or whatever? Like, in a traditional family viewpoint, sure, all children love their grandparents. But what if your grandma is like a fucking asshole? You know, if my kiddo's watching this, this is a bit of relatable content. She's got a grandma who is pretty fucking terrible. Matt asserting he has a deeper level is making my head spin. Yeah, it's getting me right in the feels, and by feels I mean intestines. Like, yeah, I can totally imagine a scenario where a kid doesn't want a kiss from grandma. Like, even if there's no like reason behind it, who fucking cares? Grandma's not owed a kiss. Get over it.
I cannot imagine what my dad's reaction would have been. It would not have been pleasant, I can tell you. My reaction with my own kids wouldn't be pleasant in that situation. Yes, I tell them. I guess I violate. Let me tell you something.
Yeah.
I violate.
He definitely, everything he thinks and feels is conceived of in the moment and in response to whatever is directly in front of him. Absolutely. He is a creature of focused hate. If you put Joe Biden in front of him, he'll be like, protect children. Children need to have consent. And if you put this book in front of him, he'll be like, forget children. Children don't deserve to have to consent. When older people came over, it was cool, but some family of mine smell weird and have leave spittle. Gag. Also, there's there's something to be said about male members of the family that were sometimes a little odd. I still ask for a hug from my kids before I physically engage, and I do too. Like, I'm not a very huggy guy with my kids, and I don't know why. I'm probably very broken, but you know, my youngest son a few months back was really having a hard go. And he was crying, and he'd been hurting himself. And, you know, we were having a conversation, and I could see that he wanted a hug. But I said, you know, can I give you a hug? Because that's what humans do, right? If I had reached in for a hug, I could have made things worse if he didn't want one.
My kids consent all the time in the sense that I force them to do things they don't want to do. That's much of the day, in fact, is involves them doing things that it's not their idea to do those things. They don't really want to do those things. I mean, clean their room. Let's start with that.
I believe you, Matt. I believe that you spend a great deal of time forcing people to do things that they don't want to do. Like, I could, if there was the face, look at this face for a minute. If this was the face of someone who like ran a sweatshop, I would 100% buy that.
Like, I don't get their consent for that. What is that, forced labor? Is that slavery? My kids know that when a family member comes over to visit, you go and give them a hug. It's not an option. It's not a choice. You are required to do that.
Yeah, and when you know, my kids are in the gay hole bathroom and you know, a random stranger wants to pedalize them, my kids know that, you know, this is what God intended.
Look at me like I'm frickin' Frankenstein. Give your father a hug.
Because that's polite. But the major problem here is that the book explicitly sexualizes physical contact between family members. I mean, this...
Fuck no. In fact, there's nothing about that is remotely true. That is extension, right? So what Matt Walsh is doing here is saying, reading into the situation and implying that the book is making it sound dirty that a boy would sit on a person's lap. The book doesn't say anything about that. The book simply is like, hey, kid didn't want to sit on the people's lap, doesn't have to, right? It didn't say didn't want to sit on the people's lap because he knows they're degenerate monsters who want to rub penis parts against him. No. Just, yeah, I don't want to sit on your lap. I'm good. How dare you, right? What if the kid had said, actually, I'm going to another room to go play with my toys? Does the kid have the ability to do that? Because I don't think Matt thinks that. And I don't think that there's anything sexual about a child saying, I want to go play with my toys, instead of sitting on your lap and having a cuddle, right? Fucking shit take.
This author is, who is it? Eleanor Morrison. He, his, her, whoever's, they're taking their own, I don't want to misgender them. whoever it is, they're taking their own complex and projecting it onto everyone else. I don't know.
I don't want to misgender them, he said, knowing that he was more than happy to misgender them. Homework and cleaning versus forcing your kids to hug, kiss, sit on people's laps. Suspicious, righty is suspicious. Well, congrats, Matt. You just fucked yourself into being unable to argue against rape, the existence of the state, and Mayo-cide. Keep making content, Matt Walsh. Keep spraying out your words of truth that we will use against you, you dumb fuck.
I don't know what's going on with you, that you view a hug from an aunt or a grandfather as potentially sexual in nature, but it's something you should be talking to a therapist about. You don't write it into a children's book.
So this is the thing, is there's nothing in that book that says sexual in nature. Matt wants there to be an implication of sexual in nature because it means that you can just ignore the fact that a child has the ability to consent on whether he wants to sit on somebody's lap totally platonically or not. I sat on a lot of laps when I was a kid. More than happy to do so as a child. My mom and I cuddled a lot. There was no sexual component to it. I'm sure Matt's cuddled with whatever monsterlets that, sprang forth from his urethra. But it didn't have to be sexual. However, telling a kid that they don't have to sit on someone's lap platonically is also telling someone that they don't have to sit on someone's lap sexually. And when I was a kid, I wound up in a situation where I was in a room with a man who wanted me to tickle him in a sexual way. I was 5 years old, and I didn't know that I couldn't do that. I was terrified, but I went along because that's what I was told to do. And not told to, like, my parents weren't reading me a book that says, like, always grope older men. But absolutely, I was, when a grown-up asks you to do something, you do something. And when a grown-up's nice to you, you have to be nice to them too. And, I was 5 years fucking old. But Matt wants to draw this conclusion that the left are forcing every single act to be viewed as a sex crime against children, which is funny because at the same time, I'm sure he also has plenty of videos talking about all of the sex crimes against children that the left are constantly perpetrating. This book could never please Matt. It could never try to teach this lesson softly as it does, and he hates it. Or it could be explicit. Or it could be explicit and say, "Hey, if Matt Walsh tries to touch your junk, call the police," and he'd still hate it. Totally.
For God's sake. And this is what you get from the left, right? They grew up on a diet of Freud, whether they know it or not, and now they see everything in sexual terms. Everything is sexual. They're incapable of conceptualizing any human interaction that might occur
like, say, sniffing a child's hair.
Outside of a sexual framework. Everything for them is sexual.
I'm not saying it's not gross when Biden does that. It's gross when Biden does that. But you can't be like, the left want everything to be about sex. Let's watch a little Nos X video and talk about how he's trying to fuck children.
Potentially sexual. And they're weirdos, in other words, to summarize.
Losers, in other words.
I mean, let's take the family dynamic out of it for a second, just for a moment, because I don't want to dwell on that. It's too disturbing. And let's pretend that we're talking about just some dude and a girl, and they're not related. Even in that context, the idea that verbal consent should precede every physical interaction is asinine. I mean,
is it? Because I feel like if... another example. And I talked about this last week. I was, many, many years ago, I was in a gay bar with a friend of mine who was gay and who was introducing me to his boyfriend. I was married. I'm heterosexual. I'm obviously very comfortable with the idea that there are the gays in the world, but I was very much the person in the space who wasn't supposedly, or supposed to be in that space. I was the outlier. Not supposed to be, but you know what I mean? Like, it was a gay bar. I was the straight guy. And immediately upon walking in, a transgender, a trans woman walked up and just grabbed me by the schlong. And I had, there was no consent. There was no, hey, is it cool? Now, I understand that gay bars are very different environments with different social norms and stuff. And that's not me going, the queers. It's simply in that moment where somebody acted upon me physically in a manner that was uncomfortable to me. Had it been, let's say, a hand around my waist, I probably would have been not as uncomfortable, but certainly, it would have been like, hey, things are happening. Hey. Had that consent conversation happened, it wouldn't have been a big deal. Why is it such a surprise that asking for consent is, like, good? Oh, Matt.
My wife would look at me like a maniac if we were walking somewhere.
Okay, your wife looks at you like you're a maniac every goddamn day because you're a maniac.
Down the sidewalk or something, and I said, excuse me.
May I have consent to hold your hand? Requesting permission to initiate physical interaction.
Permission granted.
Because that's what a conversation around consent looks like. Yeah, nailed it, buddy. I'm gonna rebut this point. A married couple, there is a certain amount of implied consent for things like holding hands. Now, there's limits to that. For example, having sex with them when they're sleeping. That may be a thing that a couple is perfectly okay with, but that's probably a conversation to have before you do the whole having sex with them while they're sleeping thing. Walking down the street, if I'm walking with one of my partners and I reach down and I take their hand, probably the implied consent is very real. And that we've had conversations before about, is it okay if I do this? Because, I'm a person who is non-monogamous and I don't have a harem or anything like that, but, the feelings of my partners would be taken into account. And if my partner maybe isn't, out as a polyamorous person and, someone that they know could be around, they might be really freaked out if I take their hand. That factors in. I just don't understand why we have these conversations. We may not have this conversation that Matt Walsh just had because it's a bullshit conversation, but there is a certain amount of implied consent, and that's a gray area where it ends and where it begins. Absolutely. But when you are doing something with a partner, that partner should have the ability to say no. If we're walking down the street and I take your hand, that's probably not a big deal. But if my partner pulls a Melania Trump and yanks my hand away, that's okay. She did not owe Donald the love. Didn't owe Donald.
You may maintain physical contact for 75 seconds.
Thank you, ma'am.
That's what they want. Now we know why leftists are so angry all the time. They're lonely. Nobody wants to be around them because they act like some bizarre mix. It's the weirdest mix of hedonistic sex fiend and robot.
You wouldn't know perversion if it put clamps on your testicles.
Leftist men in particular.
Hedonistic sex fiend and robot. I guarantee you that, in the middle of the night, probably last night, Matt Walsh sat up and was like, hedonistic robot sex fiend. Oh my God, write this shit down. This shit writes itself. Oh my God, this is great.
Are just lonely. There's no way any woman wants to be around this kind of thing if they carry on like this.
Matt, buddy, we're not lonely. I carry on like this. I do ask for consent. And you know what? Sometimes I gets it. I loved watching Melania put away. That seriously was just oh my heart. That scene where Donald goes to grab her hand and she's like, fuck no. Yes. There's been so many times that I've been at a bar and a man touches me or does something completely inappropriate where I played it off because I was scared. I wish that wasn't the way it happened. Mormons kind of instilled a vision of who I had to be, obedient and silent to men. Now I'm not the same, and I'm so happy for it. Teach your kids consent and allow them to be vocal. 100%. I don't think that's like, I know you were raised Mormon, and I know that, Mormonism is particularly bad for that. But I think society, Matt Walsh is an example of that idea that you can't just saunter up to a woman and like put an arm around her and be like, say, little lady, can I buy you a beer beverage? Like, that's not okay. And it's always been viewed as okay because women's voices weren't listened to. And because men often, certainly like the 1950s stereotypical men, the world was how they viewed it, right? White men. So stereotypical white men from the 1950s would be like, well, you know what? If a woman walked up to me, put her arm around me, called me a nice name, and offered to buy me a drink, God damn it, I'd love that. Therefore, women folk will like it too. It's not really how this works. And yeah, at the bar is a particular scenario where, men often touch women in inappropriate ways. And I'm not talking about, like grab them by the pussy or anything like that. I'm talking about like, walking up and putting your hand on a woman's arm or whatever. A lot of the time women don't like that. And a lot of women don't feel comfortable and supported in our society saying anything about it. And that's wrong and dangerous and stupid. The left is anti-Freud and anti-Epidule. I'm assuming referring to Oedipus? Freud is the right-wing position, you thick fuck. Consent is also actually just sexy. The idea that it's a contract we sign in 50 Shades or a robotic convo. Hey babe, can we try this thing? And then if they say yes, you literally do the pog face because it's awesome. Yes. I had a partner once where I asked consent to go down. I was like, is that, are we cool? And it was because in conversation, they had implied that they liked that, but they were hesitant about it. And so I asked, I was like, is that poggers? And the reaction from them was like, no. And later they explained that if I had to ask for that consent, obviously I wasn't man enough, and there's reasons I'm not with that person. But no, most of the time when you ask consent, as long as you don't do it in the I would like to insert finger into your rectum, probably you can either have enthusiastic consent, which is like, fuck yeah, do that shit, or you have, no, and that's okay, right? Asking is free. When you just stick your finger in someone's rectum, there's things that can happen as a result if you didn't have that consent. I don't think that's radical, and I don't think that's crazy. I think consent is sexy, and I think Matt Walsh is not. And I can prove this by just watching him speak.
All of this hyper consent stuff, it makes sense among machines, but for organic.
If two machines are going to share digital code, then clearly they should have a handshake with appropriate permissions granted. That's not how humans are. Yeah.
Creatures, we need organic interactions. We need things to develop naturally. But
we need things to develop naturally. And there is no world in which a natural part of that development can be making sure you're not misreading. Making sure that what you're comfortable with, the other person's comfortable with. I've had plenty of times where I have been talking to somebody and really picking up like this, there is a vibe, and like hot down. And when I've been like, so the vibe, and they're like, okay, what? I'm glad I asked. Because if I had just been like, well, clearly there's a vibe, I will yoink or whatever. Now I have ruined this moment, and I have really fucked up this moment badly and probably hurt that person. So yeah, Matt, let's have things develop organically.
it's all, again, this is, I'm talking now about two adults who aren't related. So I'm doing the book a favor by framing the conversation this way. What the book is actually talking about, again, are little kids and their grandparents. They want robotic consent requests, even in that context.
The problem is that guys like Matt Walsh can't imagine a way to ask for something nicely. Like, does he know he's self-reporting that? The concept of a relationship developing naturally is implied consent. Yeah, but you can actually know that without asking. Or you can't actually know that without asking. 100%.
Excuse me, young one. May I have consent to kiss you on the forehead and squeeze your cheeks and remark on how big you've gotten since I last saw you 2 months ago?
Permission denied. Get lost, you old fart.
That is literally the future the left wants. And I say, no thanks.
Oh, wow. The future the left wants. You know what the future the left wants is when it comes to consent? They want to make sure that they don't fuck up. They want to make sure that if they are interacting with somebody, it's a positive interaction. These are not bad things. These are good things. Fucking Matt Walsh. Like, literally, what he's doing is he is screaming out, I don't have a clue how to ask for something that I want and do so in a way that would be attractive to the other person. I just heard this term the other day. What was it? I got a link sent to me because I didn't know the particulars on the term. Desire smuggling. I'd never heard of this as a term before. Desire smuggling. Matt Walsh is basically screaming out, I live for desire smuggling. What that is basically, if I understand correctly, is, and I'm by no means an expert on the topic, it's a thing that we all do where there's things we want, we don't know how to ask for them, and so we manipulate a way around it, so we don't ask for it, we just sort of, push for it in weird ways. So yeah, like, if Matt Walsh doesn't know how to ask his wife, hey, do you mind if I hold your hand? And it's probably not even like that. It's just like, want to hold hands? That's kind of sweet, right? I'm assuming Matt Walsh, being a good Christian fellow, I'm sure he's been married to his sweetheart TradCon wife for a very long time. And what is not sweet about looking at that person who you have this implied consent in place and just looking at them and saying, want to hold hands? What's wrong with that? Because he can't do that, he has to take. That's a kind of desire smuggling, if I understand correctly. If he wants her to put a finger in his bum, he's not going to say, would you be okay with putting a finger in my bum? He's going to do, like, whatever he can to try and, like, oops-a-doodle. Well, it's there now. Fuck. That's dangerous and creepy. Let's see. And there's nothing inorganic about someone for consent. It comes up naturally. Totally. I mean, it's inorganic in that asking for consent is not carbon-based. Haha, organic chemistry jokes. It's only unnatural if you're Matt Walsh and the first thing you say to a woman is, hello, procreation unit, how much to purchase you as my property and use you at my leisure? To be fair, he strikes me as more of a calling them chattel sort of a bloke. How many goats and chickens will it take to make you please me for an evening, milady? Yeah, I'm not a fan of Matt Walsh. Thank you guys very much for joining me. It's always a pleasure to have good conversation, and I appreciate it very much.